I have a joke. Why did the lifeguard have to save the hippie? Because he was so far out. No, but seriously, get it? Because, like, he's a hippie and, like, far out's, like, groovy, like, stuff like that. Anyways, besides the stereotypes and the funny slang terms we have adapted today, there is so much more to hippie culture than what you think. Hippies were their own people, and they did not care what others thought of them. Because hippie culture is something that we see every day, but don't really, I think, inform ourselves about, I was really excited to take this on as a topic for my speech and learn more about hippie culture. Hippies were their own lifestyle. They were their own people. Therefore, they were their own culture. They had their own customs. They had their own way to dress and their own way to act and their own beliefs. And in today's speech, we will discover how hippies first became what they are known as, and a known artifact that helped them with their movement. Now, in the early beginnings of hippies, obviously they were made fun of, there were stereotypes, but when did hippies really start to become their own culture, their own lifestyle? Hippies derive from the word hipster, which just means a person who goes against the social norm. Hippies began in the 1960s and the 1970s, and they were definitely against the social norm. According to Ned Cogwell's article, The History of the Hippie, the Beat Generation was America's first counterculture movement. So the Beat Generation was a literary movement where people called out people that were in high political ranking in poems, in stories, and this is where we first see the hippie movement start. Now, hippies did so many different activities. They were primarily involved in drug use, as we all know, smoking weed. They also took acid. They mixed LSD with Kool-Aid and called it the acid test. They had their own way to dress and their own accessories here. Men often wore the long beards and the long hair, and women wore long skirts or long dresses with long hair and the flower bands and open-toed shoes. Hippies also had run down big vans like the one you see in Scooby-Doo, the Scooby van. That's kind of what a hippie would have driven in the 1970s. In the 1967, hippies created the Summer of Love, where they went into these big cities and had festivals, and the most prominent city for hippies was San Francisco, California. And hippies would participate in music festivals, and the most popular artists among hippies were Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin. And they often partook in nudity, and they just went crazy. Again, they were on drugs, and it was the summer where they just went crazy and did whatever they wanted and didn't care what people thought about them. Now, we looked at hippie accessories, flower crowns, the open-toed shoes, their sayings, groovy, stuff like that. But what's an artifact that a hippie is known for? And you have to think really hard about that. I'll let you think. Now, if you guessed a peace sign, then you are correct. And here's my little peace sign. So, how did the peace sign come about? The peace sign was actually designed in London during a protest. According to Jacobo Prisco's article, 3 Lines in a Circle, A Brief History of a Peace Sign, the peace sign design is supposed to represent nuclear disarmament. There's supposed to be an N, if you look closely at the peace sign, and a D. And this symbol was created in London for a protest against nuclear weapons. And that's how it came about. Now, the peace sign moved into the United States during the 1960s, and people started to recognize this design as a symbol for victory, obviously peace, but also victory. And it became a symbol against war and hate and crime. The peace sign soon became the universal symbol. According to Mortal Journey's article, Origin of the Peace Sign, pretty soon people were putting the peace sign on their cars, on their clothing. People were putting peace signs on their protest posters. The peace sign became kind of this universal symbol that everyone is able to recognize. Now, how did hippies use the peace sign? Well, hippies were a prominent voice in the Vietnam War protests. And the Vietnam War protests were against the basically men being chosen to go to war. It was kind of a protest against that, beside of being chosen to go to war and wanting the choice. The Vietnam War protests, the hippies were kind of protesting that. And something that they used was the peace sign in a lot of their protest signs, and everywhere they went, they would include the peace sign in lettering, love not war, and stuff like that. The peace sign, again, not only was used in the war, it was also used in their clothing. Again, they put it on their cars, they put it everywhere. And now today, we still use the peace sign as kind of a symbol for peace and equality and, against hate crimes today. And I think hippies really set the tone for people to speak up against injustice and to also be themselves, be true to themselves. And hippies were definitely not scared to be themselves. And the hippies were definitely able to kind of reinvent a social culture and to show people, like, hey, it's okay to stand out and it's okay to stand up for what you believe in. And still, there is plenty of hippie culture in many big cities, especially San Francisco, which we talked about. And as we leave this speech, I want everyone to think of this quote by Alan Watts. The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge it, move with it, and join the dance.